what I got after analyzing the best current pro Cypher players in Tier 1. That's Hiro from Fnatic and CHICOO from Edward Gaming. Found off VLR last 60 days stats on Sunset. Now, these are your play spaces on defense. Blue areas are places you kind of contest at. Yellow areas are places you commonly play at. But you play in these areas in certain scenarios. So, this blue one right here is if you want to contest that Cypher camera and you're playing B at the start of the specifically if you're going to be playing on backside of B, so you don't start B main if you're going to be playing market. You also want to be playing B main at the start if you're trying to contest or do like a trap sort of play, as it's kind of common for ciphers to put a cam there and even a trip over here towards the stairway. It's a low trip, by the way, not a high trip. So the blue areas are places you contest at the start of the round sometimes, but you don't overstay your welcome. Make sure to not do that. So when the round goes on too much, usually back up a bit. Or if you're getting contested, like once the actual fight happens, then you back out. You don't overstay your welcome. So speaking of that, we're gonna go on to this mid stuff. I'll talk about that. So on A, you're basically just playing full retake, especially if you're specifically setting up for A. It's just a full retake setup, okay? So there's two ways he plays A. He either plays from CT and tries to get picks like that with his trips and make sure they don't over push into CT, so you defend that space essentially. And the second one is he starts mid if he sets up A. And there's two ways to do mid. The one is a high-low type of setup where they're watching for this low mid-bottom right player. If it's pretty good if you think they consistently kind of peak here at the start of the round and they don't smoke off mid-top. It's a very good play. And the second one is they're pushing mid. So that type of play, and you can push. You don't have to stay on A. Like Fnatic did this all the time, a lot in their games. They set up A, and their team just pushes out onto mid. There's not really a set way for you to push mid, you're just being there to support your team, and you're going to be fast rotating slash falling back, you know, to play the A angle again, so like CT for the retake. So don't overstay your welcome again. So this market space, it's probably the least common place you kind of play at. The two cases you'd be playing market is you're fighting for market with a trip in a one-way and trying to defend that space really heavily. And the second case is if you're doing these more uncommon trips that you might use like once a game and you're just trying to get free kills from those like weird trips that people will walk into. Cyphers also sometimes play here for the full retake setup if they're scared of getting pushed on B really hard, but it's more common for them to be playing this spot right here just from the start and have really deep trips to try to play off. One thing I forgot to mention is if the enemy team runs a KO and they got their ult, the Cyphers always set up for A on that round, and they usually start mid and lean in towards B during the mid round. And the reason they do that, I'm pretty sure, is because A's more uncommon, so if they do ult for that, they're not going to be ready for those Cypher trips, and you can have your smoker play A, so you can still smoke B side if they push on B. And it's kind of harder to get kill trips on B, because it's so common, and I don't think the kill trips aren't as good compared to A. That's probably why they set up A. Now to move on to the actual Valorant type of stuff. So this is the pistol rounds everyone did for the 6 games I watched. They only did the A one once and they lost that round, but I included it, you know, just in case you want to run it. I'm pretty sure the camera goes here. I forgot to note it down though, but this is where they had the cameras on a normal round for that type of setup. Now for B, which they usually always play, so I would go B for pistol round. You always have this one-way cage. For that pistol setup, you have a ghost and a trip. Now this is a trip that CHICOO did a lot in Edward Gaming in non-pistol rounds too, like normal rounds, but I don't think that trip's really that useful. I never saw it get any value ever. And it's really just primary for info, not a kill trip of course, but I really don't think it's a trip you should really use. I never saw it get any value in all the rounds I watched they used it on. And there's also this type of trip, which is also an info type of trip, which I think honestly found more value than this hop up one, so I wouldn't use the hop up honestly. But there's a case you want to use the hop up, which is if you're doing like a full backside type of setup on a normal round, not pistol round. and it'd be like that to just, for you to anchor down backside a lot easier. But anyways, I would do this setup for a pistol round where you got the one-way cage, the trip for market, that should be the non-crouch and jumpable one, and you have the camera on window here to watch B main but also into market. And you just want to pop your one-way cage, like preferably a little bit before they push, that way you get the one-way fight. But if it's too late, just put it up when they execute on. So very hectic, I know. But this is another type of stuff they did. So this camera right here, it's like a one-way camera to watch into tiles. You'll see their feet and they can't see the camera until they're like a lot more pushed up, like in this area somewhere. And with this setup, I'm not sure if they did it here because I might have never seen it if I didn't mark it down, but they might have the one-way cage market, and they have a lot of different type of trips here. So these trips are used in different scenarios, and I'll try to cover them. But first, I'll go over the cages. So you always want to do this one-way cage, but there is a if case when you don't start one-way caging and do a normal cage. So this one-way cage apparently is not perfect. You could actually go over here and crouch, and you could fight this backside guy. So if the enemy team starts doing that, like they're a team that's really big brain like that, then you don't do the one-way cage anymore, you just do the normal cage. So just because you're setting up for market doesn't necessarily mean you're playing in a market, and there's three ways to go about this with the setup. First one is you're contesting for B main, and you put that trip for the info. This is a low trip by the way, and they can jump over this. But if they jump over, your market player should be able to hear it. I think you can hear it on the camera too, pretty sure. I forgot I had this, but this would show you kind of how you play with that setup more. So if you have a trip there, you're also going to be tripping market in this case. And you're kind of leaning really heavy into the B main. And you're really trying to fight that until they destroy your Cypher stuff on there. And you fall back towards backside to play with a one-way market if you don't got any more time. And if they just push into market, you don't think anyone's B main, they could push into B main in that case. So let me show you this one-way cage really quick. I'm not sure if they had this one-way cage for this type of setup, as I didn't mark it down. As it was honestly really hard to see where their ciphers were caging at most of the time because they don't show. This is where the one-way cage goes. You're gonna need to look up your own lineup video because I do not know the lineups. That's what the one-way cage looks like. You do gotta note that they can see you. So they can especially see you if they're in tiles, for example. And this one-way cage should only be used when they're executing onto market. And this trip here somewhere will kill the front player most likely, and you could contest the people still trying to push into market. The second case you want to use that one-way cage is just to stall off the market push if it seems like they're about to push into market. And in that type of case, you don't want to peek with that one-way because you could get picked off. You're really just holding like that, or like this with that one-way cage, but not pushing more than that. So these market trips, you should always have one when you're playing market. These front two trips are the most common ones. If they kind of know about that market trip and they start breaking it, or they just maybe did a previous round, you might want to put that trip more far back here and you could wallbang that pillar thing. This trip, I don't think is that useful, but it could be useful if you're planning on rotating or kind of playing from back here, because you can still shoot the enemy if they're way over here, but I don't think it's that useful really. I didn't think about this till now, but the reason why they had that trip so far back was probably because the enemy team ran a Sova, and they're afraid of getting the market trip getting shocked like that. So that's probably the real reason why they had it way back there. Maggie, I swear it always happens on your Cypher Valorant Plan stuff, but I swear every time I do your video, like, I lose all my progress. This time I somehow didn't though. I got a black screen of death, and luckily my laptop somehow kept everything even though I restarted my whole computer. So luckily I didn't have to do it off memory again like Haven. So these really far back trips are for when you're playing full retake because you're scared of something on the enemy team such as a big ol', or maybe you have a big ol' on your team that you want to play retake with. And in that type of scenario, then you're playing with these really far back trips. In this type of setup, you always want to put a trip towards this back right area right here. And you always want to start with a horizontal trip. This trip's only done later in the game if you already did this type of setup and they're aware of that trip that you run. And you always have one trip on the front here. Not this info trip, but the vertical type one. So this one's a pure info trip to see if anyone pushed on the left. If you have a market player, then you could opt for one of these two kill trips right here. This one almost always gets a kill, and this one's also for info, but also a potential kill trip. This trip isn't really as much as a kill trip though, it gets broken pretty easy, but it is still a kill trip. And again, also for info, but it usually always gets broken though. This one doesn't always get broken because they gotta push pretty far to break that trip. Another reason why I'd be doing this type of setup from way back here is if you're on your camera because you're doing some sort of trap play on mid, then you're having camera spot that and you're just hiding back here with your camera out to activate the trap play. One thing I forgot to mention here is this trip right here. This trip is used if you're playing inside market. And of course with that type of unbreakable trip, I get you might want to do that every round, but you do not want to do that, especially against enemy teams that have you told to break that trip. But in some weird scenario where they don't have that you told to break that unbreakable type of trip, then you might want to spam it more. But you don't want to put that trip every round. Like I think pro teams on average only did it like 3 out of 12 rounds, I think, because they don't want their trips to be predictable. Okay. So really quick, this is what the Cypher camera looks like, and again, you want to double check this with a Cypher guide video, because I did not look up anything for Cypher. I only analyzed and break down the pro play. But I'm pretty sure this is where the camera goes. It's like this line indent, and you want to match it with that horizontal line. And this sees their feet on tiles, and part of the walk up over here. So this setup's done to contest B main a bit when you're playing on B, and either way you go, you always put your camera inside here. And this type of setup's especially useful if you know they have a lurker in B main and they try to get the orb a lot or to just break your Cypher trips, then the setup's pretty good. You especially want to do this type of setup if your team's not stack fighting B and they're getting B main for free without investing any utility. So this is a scenario where you really want to do this type of setup. That way they probably will use utility to clear out B main, and they'll probably use it on future rounds because they're a bit more scared. Now there's two ways to go about this setup. The first is if you're fighting B main more aggressively. So as soon as the round starts, you want to put the trip right here. It's not right on the wall, but a little bit after. It's pretty low to the ground too. And this is so it's harder for the enemy team to see, so they're more likely to walk in the trip, especially as there's a stairway right here. It's also to catch the Roomba. Raze is pretty meta on this map. It's really common for Razes to Roomba to clear this pillar area. So you want to catch that Roomba if possible. And when a fight happens, you want your smoker to preferably smoke that off, and you have your trap activate, like you do your flashes, etc. Kind of fight for B main. And again, do not overstay or welcome in these scenarios. And when you're doing that type of setup, you want either a trip market or a trip mid-top. If you trip mid-top, you want to always close the market door. You have a teammate do that. If not, then you're tripping market essentially. And again, this type of setup should only be used if you're with a teammate or doing a trap type of setup. So there's two ways to go about this setup. You always want to go with that first one. And you kind of want to do that earlier on defense half. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to condition your enemies with that. That's because with the second setup, you're not actually fighting for B main, you're just going to have the camera right there. And it's just to kind of bluff out that you're doing a trap play setup again and potentially going to fight B main heavy, so you got to be more worried about that. And you're really just playing backside in this scenario. So when doing this setup, you want the two trips to be over here and over here. They're primarily just for info to see which way they're pushing on to fight for backside. But this one is also a partial kill trip. And you want to throw a cage pre-round right here in this type of setup. And you activate that cage when that trip goes off or when they break it. And with that cage too, you can hide in that corner and they can't see you all the way. So for both variations, you always want to have that one-way cage right here. And this trip right here, I think they only did once, and that was with the first variation. And I think that was because they're kind of fighting for it, but it's really just Cypher by himself. He didn't really plan to hard contest this, so he kind of fell back right away. And that's when he had this trip. And so this is a setup you'd be using if you want to do that unbreakable trip for a round. You're essentially one-way caging both sides and have the camera here like you did pistol round. And that camera sees into market and into B main. And you just activate either one-way cage when you see someone. So the most common trips right here is this unbreakable trip and either the market or mid-top. If you do the mid-top trip, then you always want someone to close that market door, and you essentially activate that one-way cage when the market door gets broken to stall them off. So if you note the enemy team commonly tries to destroy your front trip with like utility, they want to use this trip instead of unbreakable trip. And although it's mostly for info, if you get really lucky, someone could walk into it and your market player could kill them. Now the second variation of the setup is you're trying to hold backside very heavy, and you want to always have a trip here more towards the backside of that. And the second trip either goes here or here. I'm pretty sure when Fnatic did this, they had that. And CHICOO setup, he had it over here. Again, I really don't think this trip is that useful. I never saw it get any value. It does get info, but I never see it get value, honestly. So just do that trip. So when doing this type of setup, you always want to have a player market, and you're playing on back B site. So there is a case where you don't one-way cage market, and that's if your Omen's playing market, because they could pretty fast one-way that. And if that's the type of scenario, I would try to save onto that cage and tell your Omen to one-way. Though this camera's pretty easy, make sure to look up a Cypher guide video to see where the Cypher mains put their camera at, as I'm sure one is better than the other. But both of them did the job of watching to market and watching to B main. So this setup's done when you're super confident they're not gonna go B this round. Maybe they're super disinclined towards B, or they really love to hit A. And you just really don't think they're gonna go B this round. And in this type of case, then you're doing this full backside type of setup. And you want to make sure they can't get past your trips over here. So you had info if they pushed past site so they don't lurk on you later. And there's two variation ways to go about this. You have someone close market door and fast rotate with you. And while they do that, you have a camera into B main as soon as the round starts. That way it can spot into B main. This one goes pretty high up, by the way. And you just fast rotate with it and check your camera occasionally. And the second way is you have this camera right here. This is a bit more uncommon they did, but sometimes they just had the camera right here, so they had no info on B main. The Cypher is the one that closes the door, and either way, like either variation, you're gonna be going towards mid top and holding for this mid top push. And with this setup, your whole team could 4-stack A essentially, or you have a 3 on A and one person towards mid for the fast rotate on A and also to fight mid with you. Of course, this is semi-gamble, so as soon as you have info that they're towards B, so like your camera notes them in B main footsteps or you spot them, or the market door gets destroyed, then you insta-rotate back and try to play for backside if you got there in time. If not, then you're just playing for a retake back here. So this is the CHICOO setup on A. They have their camera spot for elbow, I'm pretty sure. I have no idea where this honestly goes though. It goes somewhere on the tower, I'll try to show it in a bit. And they have two trips. One's the trip they throw here for info really, like on the pre-round, and one's mid-top. And you're playing A in two spots, either this one or this one. So I'm pretty sure I found the camera. It actually spots into A main over here too for the walk-up. And I'm pretty sure it sees part of elbow. So as you can see, it does see into elbow, both if they're on the wall right here, but also, especially if they're back here. So even if you miss the timing on the A main walk-up, you can see when they get onto side or push the elbow a bit. Especially if they don't spot your camera at. It's a pretty hard camera to throw, but to throw it, you get on top of here. and you're run jumping towards that spot to throw your camera. It's a pretty hard camera to throw, so I'm just gonna clip it to show you example when I finally get it right. So here's an example case right here. If you don't get the camera right, you actually can't see into elbow right away, so you gotta be careful. It has to get within like this section right here, basically. If it does not, then it won't see into elbow all the way. And nope. So yeah, it's very exact camera you gotta get. Very hard to do, honestly. And I give up finding it badges, so you're gonna have to find a lineup. I couldn't ever see where his cages was, because they never actually hard push sight when he did this setup, and when they did push sight with his setup, he wasn't on A because he rotated off already. So I couldn't see where his cages was, because spectators didn't show it. But we'll go on to the second A sub. This is one Hiro does from Fnatic. And this is where he has his cages. So he always playing CT over here with this setup. He's just playing full retake on A. And this cage right here makes it so they can't cross out. You can't spot this over here, so you could take a small fight, but they could also take that fight too, vice versa. So I think I actually got this trip wrong. I think it goes something diagonal like that. Because I remember one of the fights, like, Safe went into the cage and they couldn't really find where the trip was. So I think the cage was a bit deeper like that. And I'm sure a Cypher Guide video will somewhere show that type of setup. But I do know it's something like that. Now the second cage right here, it blocks off elbow all the way. And it blocks off sight. There is a gap right here. But with where you're gonna play, they can't actually see where you're at. Because the cage blocks off everything. This cage should be put up as soon as your trip goes down, or they get tripped, or you know they're like starting to push that way, then you put that cage up. This left cage, however, it's used only if you didn't get smoked off, so you need cover. And again, it blocks that for everything, so it's pretty safe. Or maybe they chose to one-way smoke that instead. You could do the same thing, you could take a fight for a bit and then run away before your cage gets down. And in a case where they do smoke you off, which is going to be most cases honestly, then you don't put that cage up. You're going to put that cage up for the retake. That way you can isolate this right fight a bit more and also walk out onto site. So again, you want one right trip and one left trip. This trip should be pretty low to the ground. That way it catches dog util and they're more likely to get a kill. Like someone gets into the trip for a kill. Especially for mid-top players right there. Another reason why you want it low to the ground is because you have your camera up there, so it's going to spot anyone trying to lurk past that anyways if they jump over, for example, because you'll spot them. Now, the second trip, there's two trips you could do here. One's right here, and the other one's right here. I'm not 100% sure if they do it for the normal one or the low one, but I do the low one right here. Because it's trying to be a kill trip rather than info, so you want it low to the ground so it's more likely to catch someone. And with that trip too, you could wallbang anyone trying to plant the bomb, and anyone that goes from elbow swing. So with this left trip, make sure to be playing the right side so you can actually kill them if they walk inside of the trip. And if you play A site more than once, which you likely will, but if they push A site more than once when you set up, make sure to swap your left trip for the other one you haven't done yet. And again, in case you forgot from earlier on in the video, but you're playing full retake on A, and although you could start here too, you could also start mid and then rotate fast towards CT. That's all I have for my analysis of the pro ciphers on Sunset defense. Make sure to look up one-way lineups for the cages on Sunset, and also probably some one-off round type things you could do, like TikTok type stuff, you know? Like Acre the dog, I'm sure he has some cool things you could do, potentially. This took me like 4 hours to do, and I feel like it's mostly because I'm dead tired, thinking it'd be shorter amount of time I'd do for recording. So,